Hey, today is an extra special video because we just couldn't wait to get this out. We're talking about the new release from Ancestry of the Freedmen's Bureau records. Now, everyone should know about these records, okay? And they are free for everyone to access, regardless of your subscription status. However, you do need to have at least a free guest account to sign into so that you can access these records. Now, if you are not familiar with these records, they were created post-Civil War to help assist enslaved persons, free persons of color, poor whites, all to help rebuild their lives after the Civil War ended. Now, these records contain some of our only records for some of our black ancestors, but also contain many white ancestors as well. So everyone should be aware at how valuable these records really are. These are the Freedmen Bureau records and the Freedman Bank records, and are now available on Ancestry and have an every name index. So this, before we had to scroll through every page, this index is fabulous. Okay, now before we go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Connie Knox. I am a lifelong genealogist here to help you go further, faster, and factually with your family history research. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so that you get notified each time I upload a video. Genealogy TV has a website, a newsletter, and a Facebook page. Links for all of that are in the show notes below. Now, there is a handout for this episode as well. That is for the information access level channel members. You can join channel membership by hitting the join button. You can also find them at genealogytv.org. This is a footnotes episode, and I like to call them footnotes because it's in the footnotes where the real sources are. And today's real source, she's an expert in this area. And so her name is Nicka Sewell-Smith. She is a professional photographer, speaker, host, consultant. She is a documentarian and has more than 20 years of experience as a genealogist. She has extensive experience in African ancestor genealogy and reverse genealogy, and is an expert at genealogical research in the northeastern part of Louisiana. Now, she is also, I'm telling you, phenomenal at researching enslaved communities. All right, now, I had the good fortune to talk to her earlier today, and if you are not familiar with Nicka, oh boy, you are in for a treat. So let's go check it out. Nicka, I'm so happy you are here. This is really exciting stuff. I can't wait to tell the audience about it. And thank you for joining us today to help us understand a little bit more about the Freedmen Bureau records.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, this is an exciting time in the life of genealogy, especially for those of us that research really in the Deep South, in particular African American genealogists and family history researchers, because this collection is really, for a lot of folks, the first time they're seeing their ancestors on paper as free people, because of the dates that the Bureau covers. You have the creation of the Bureau in 1865. The Bureau is created in the same act the bank is created, which more people may have heard about the Freedmen's Bank. And with it, you have folks moving into their lives as free people and making decisions for themselves and for their families. And in some instances, these decisions and choices, could change the trajectory of a family line. I mean, very easily, very simply. And so, to have all these names, to have the 3.5 million records in the collection, available in the world's largest digitized and searchable iteration of the Freedmen's Bureau is something that, again, it's something to be glad that we're living to see.
Just to be clear, for those who have never heard, and I know there's quite a few people who probably never heard of the Freedmen Bureau records or the Freedman Bank records, let's just explain the era and exactly what they are.
Right. So for the Freedmen's Bureau, the majority of the collection is from 1875 to about 1865 to 1872. But there are some locations within the country that predate this. In fact, where my family is from, an area that almost at time forgotten in some instances, it's sad, but The Mississippi Delta, in fact, is one of the areas in the country. When you're talking Louisiana, Mississippi side, Arkansas side, even Tennessee side, that area has early coverage in the Freedmen's Bureau. In fact, they have organizations before that predate the Bureau that have documentation that start in 1862, 1863 in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Even when you're in locations like South Carolina, and which that also folds in Georgia and Florida as well. Some of those records, and even in Virginia, predate the actual establishment of the Bureau. So we're talking, end of the Civil War. We're talking right after the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, except in the instance of punishment for a crime. You're talking about a war-torn country. Oftentimes people don't really, I think about the fact that our country was in an upheaval. We were fighting against each other. There was large scale famine. People were starving. There were folks who were, just so destitute and really dependent on our government to step up and to help. And not just those who were formerly enslaved. Within this collection as well, you're going to see poor whites mentioned and receiving services, as well as free people of color. And so you've got all this upheaval. You've got the Union troops in locations, where they are taking or have taken control of these areas, right. Spots like New Orleans and, even my little, small enclave where my family's from, the Union troops were there. In fact, Ulysses S. Grant tried to build a channel going from the Mississippi River to a lake in the area to hide gunboats for the Battle of Vicksburg. So the Union troops were literally in Carroll Parish or East Carroll Parish, Louisiana. So you have these, again, huge, these locations with these gigantic, massive plantations. Some of the slaveholders have absconded. They just left the plantations that they maybe lived on or they had agents on, completely abandoned them. Some of the land was confiscated by the federal government, especially if folks were officers in the Confederate Army. And so you literally, this sounds like, you're like, are you talking about? Yes, I'm talking about the United States during and after the Civil War. So we have to stabilize things. And so what the Freedmen's Bureau does is, in my opinion, it offers the first large-scale social service program that I think we had in our country, where they're doing things like to feed the hungry. They're issuing rations to people. They're issuing clothing. They are, the overseers or the administrators of labor contracts between the formerly enslaved and potentially their former slaveholders, or even people who are coming down from the North and the Midwest to come and settle on this abandoned or confiscated land. And then they start to lease it from the government. You even have hospitals that pop up, schools. They also dealt with the U.S. colored troops, the Black men who enlisted to fight in the Civil War, issuing their bounties and their pension payments. We have, the Freedmen's Bureau was over apprenticeships of children who were orphaned or whose parents were deemed to be incapable of caring for them. And in some states and locations, a parent didn't have to give permission for their child to be apprenticed out to a certain age. So, you're looking at this like slavery ended, it's over, people are free, yet there still is an underclass that also is still kind of in the system through children being apprenticed out. So in certain places like, DC and in Mississippi, you see large amounts of children being apprenticed out until they get to be the age of 21. And in some places, their former slaveholders given preference over them being apprenticed out to them. Like it literally is codified in the law of the state. So, beyond that, which still is a lot, you have marriages that are solemnized by Bureau officials or people who are given permission to marry folks on behalf of the Bureau. I mean, it's such a huge, it's a huge organization with a lot of layers that comprise it.
So a lot of times when we are referring to the Freedmen Bureau records, we're really talking about a lot of different subsets of records that kind of fall under the umbrella of the Freedmen Bureau records.
Correct.
You talked about the hospital records and the guardianship records and such. So Ancestry had a big announcement the other day. Tell us about that. And I know you have some slides that you might want to, I don't know if you want to jump to those now, but this big announcement is kind of a big deal.
Right, right. So on Tuesday, August 24th, Ancestry announced the release of 3.5 million records that are the Freedmen's Bureau. And it is the world's largest digitized and searchable collection of Freedmen's Bureau records. And this collection is, and the way that it's made searchable is so important. And I'm going to share a few slides in order for you to see exactly how expansive this is. So what you're looking at right now is a map of the states of operation that the Freedmen's Bureau operated in, and it was across 15 states, primarily in the southeast portion of the country. And some of you may notice that Delaware is included because Delaware, well, there was a reason for the Bureau to operate in Delaware. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Tennessee, the War Department had the Bureau of Tennessee, and in some places, like I was talking about with Louisiana, and parts of Mississippi, even Arkansas, Tennessee itself, some of the records are bundled in with Tennessee early, and then they may shift to other states. Like I talked about Northeast Louisiana along the Delta. Their records are in with Tennessee early on. Then they're in with Mississippi when the Bureau is created for an entire year. And then the records go back to Louisiana. So you have to know which areas are with which, states. But for the most part, we're talking about the Southeast United States. And the states that are shaded in gray, those are the ones that have the top record counts in the collection. And here's why that. Yeah, here's why that matters. Now, I wondered in sum total, right? Because the Bureau has a bunch of layers. It's field offices, it's state level records, which are labeled assistant commissioner records. It's the federal records for the national, organization. Then there's education roles of microfilm, right? The digitized collection is made up of all of these rolls of microfilm. When you total them all up nationally, it rivals the national counts for the United States Census. And that's something that I really want folks to think about. We would never expect for people to browse through the 1860, the 1870, and the 1880 census image by image.
Interesting.
Like I would, you know what I mean? Like if I said, Connie, I want you to go through the whole census in 1880. Until the collection. Yeah,
this is really, no, this is just, it's phenomenal. And I am grateful that you have this slide here too, because it really kind of pinpoints where people might be able to do their research, depending on what state they're in, but
Correct.
Yes,
and even that, even that is also subjective, right? Because while Florida is at the bottom of the list, some of their records are wrapped in with South Carolina and Georgia.
I'm not surprised.
Because of the time period. Right. There's so many different factors, but keep in mind, again, before this iteration, right, before making it available in this format, we were literally browsing this like we were going page by page through the US Census. Nationally, not the county. Because some of us, especially if you have people in your family like I do, or who I feel like were literally hiding out in a cave when the enumerators came by, and you're literally trying to find them, and and you're going page by page through entire districts or even an entire parish or county to find them on the census. This isn't that. This is the equivalent of not just the county, you going through the entire nation.
So one of the things that I think we haven't really talked about yet is that Ancestry has done an every name index.
This is, yes. So this is a name index. This is not, there are other projects that are happening right now where literally the exact text word for word is being transcribed. So that is made searchable. There have been previous projects where indexing has been done, but where the pivot is in this collection is, number one, it brings together several databases that have been created into one space. So you're not going through, right? And, instead of, sometimes you want to just search the 1860 census. Sometimes you just want to search 1870. Sometimes you want to search all of them at one time. So you're going to go through US Census, just US Census collection to do that. That is really what the Bureau collection on Ancestry is doing, is it's bringing all the different pieces of the octopus that make up the Bureau records. It's putting that in one search. That hasn't been made available before.
I think one of the cool things about this record collection is that this gives an opportunity for people who are, we're tracing backwards as we go, to find some ancestors that they didn't know that, maybe are elders by the time this record set comes along, but are in these records along with their other family members. So it helps them identify people that may be, formerly enslaved individuals that, now have a full name associated with it, which I think is rather cool.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. This is really quite extensive. Do you have any examples of something you found along the way?
Sure. And something I also that also needs to be mentioned is the fact that in addition to this being a cohesive set of records that allows you to search across the bureau, records, in one space, it's also now hintable.
Oh, sweet.
That in itself, right? Because again, we are incredible. We are awesome, but we can't be everywhere at one time like an algorithm. Okay.
Right?
And
Yes.
so the fact that this is hintable, I'm so excited because I'm like, oh my gosh, like even though I've been in this collection, pretty intimately for the last 14 plus years, now that it is hintable, I'm like, oh my gosh, what are all the things I left behind or that I didn't even know to look for?
Right.
And so that really excites me. So know that once you start, now that this collection is there, it is now hintable, just like a census or just like vital records or just like any of those things where you can start to get hints on it as well. And so, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was looking for my list. I know that there are record sets like colored troops, hospital records. There's just so much to this collection. It's amazing.
It is like a 25 layer cake or dip. And here's the thing, it really dovetails very cohesively, again, with service records from the US colored troops. Then you can get the pension cards, 1890 veteran census. You're looking at enlistments for the US colored troops within the Freedmen's Bureau collection. There's even stuff like when the business was officially done, like it was closed. M2029, which is also part of this collection, this details people's early attempts to get their pensions. So,
Oh, yeah.
especially what we're dealing now with the pandemic and you can't go into the National Archives and actually get the pensions, you can have a little bit of a holdover in some instances where you can get some of the information that might be included in a pension that someone has, again, in the Freedmen's Bureau.
I'm trying to remember, are there land records associated with this group?
Yes, there are
Kind of like
two.
the Southern Claims Commission records, but I think.
Well, no, actually, it's a pivot. There are people
Okay.
who received Homestead Act land, and
That's
that
what it
was
was.
facilitated through the Freedmen's Bureau.
Yeah, I was trying to remember because there's so many different subsets of this record set. I was trying to remember all of the different pieces.
So I've got to share some things today in terms of my own experience for one line of my family when it comes to the Freedmen's Bureau. And I think this really illustrates for folks how you can take, just a little cookie crumb. I have a son, he's young, and kids leave crumbs everywhere. And so even this morning, I was cleaning up crumbs from a Pop-Tart. And
So funny.
The little remnants, right? We have these little remnants. We're leaving remnants behind, but our ancestors did too. And so for a long time, I was fairly skeptical, even though I was going through the Bureau records a lot, right? Literally going through the process of microfilm, getting microfilm crank arm, as much as I still love the smell and being in the library and all of that, it's a thing, it's like, maybe like the smell of like a basketball for like LeBron James or,
you haven't lived till you cranked the microfilm for a couple
right,
hours, right?
Right. And I'm a little old school because sometimes with the electric ones, I forget if they go over or under and so then, and that ends up potentially being a hazard because it goes, if it's not on there right. But I digress. But in the early days, I was trying to find my ancestors while they were enslaved because I knew that the Freedmen's Bureau records documented formerly enslaved people, and sometimes and a lot of times it actually does name who their former slaveholders are, or there are clues within how the people are documented within the records that will lead you to a former slaveholder. And so the first document I'm going to show you is from the collection when I was literally mining through it at the National Archives in San Bruno. I'd have to take off work every day, take off work to go over there and go and look through documents. And the first thing I found was in letters sent. This is for field offices in Louisiana. Again, the bureau's broken down. The more local places were field offices, and then above them could have been, if the state called for it, were districts. And then those were made up of counties or parishes within a state. Then there was an assistant commissioner who was in charge of the state. Then there was the person who was over the whole bureau nationally. So just think about all those levels and the fact that every single one of those levels generates records. That's why this collection is big. So this particular letter is from the G.W. Rollins, or George W. Rollins, who was the assistant sub-assistant commissioner of the Lake Providence field office in Lake Providence, Louisiana. And it's calling for a horse that belonged to my great-great uncle, William Atlas, to be returned because his horse was stolen, and it describes the horse, the brand that it had on it, and it called for the horse to be returned at once someone found it. So for years, I thought this is the only thing I'm going to find on my family in the Freedmen's Bureau. Like, that's it. I'm like, a letter about a horse. Now, interesting story. Uncle William actually got hit by lightning and killed while on a mule about 20 years after this. Found that in the newspaper. Thought my aunt was telling stories, and then I found it covered in the paper way far away.
That's wild.
Right. So this was what the microfilm provided for me. So years later, I'm sitting at home and I am browsing through records. And at this point, I had been researching this line of my family for more than 20 years. And I'm browsing through pre-bureau records. Now, again, this is one of those collections. The Mississippi Delta is very special in the fact that it has some of the earliest records are in the Freedmen's Bureau. And this was literally at the end of a 555 or 60 page roll. And I was like 5 images until I got to the end. So the popcorn is being thrown in my mouth. I'm drinking, I'm humming, I'm singing, whatever your research process is, that was what I was doing. And I saw, and this was faint, and I actually had to take this into a program to bring it up because I was like, am I really seeing what I think I'm seeing? And so it was in a collection called Permits Granted. And so here's the thing about the Freedmen's Bureau. Despite how it's labeled, don't disregard it, because circulars to you might mean people are literally standing in the middle of the room turning in circles. That is not what a circular is. It's a flyer.
You're so funny.
So don't think, again, don't apply the terms we use today. So I'm like, what's a permit granted? And it said it was granted in Lake Providence. So I'm like, well, let me see. Maybe I can find some family members on here. And in this permit granted to my great-great uncle, John Atlas, on May 17th, 1864, 13th Amendment is not until January of 1865. So this is 7 months before that. And he is getting 95 pounds of bacon, a broom, and some tobacco. Now, I did not know that they smoked. So once I saw this, I was like, wow, okay, this is great day-to-day granular information that we don't always get on a census.
Maybe they were selling tobacco. Once they got it, they turn around and sell it for money.
Look, these folks, these are the entrepreneurial part of my family. Like that totally fits the bill.
Right. But and how much bacon can you eat?
Correct. But here's the thing. What I discovered later is that, and this is as a result of me using that notation in that green that says Short's place. I wondered, who is Short? Once I did the research later, I figured out that he was going to get rations for their enslaved community in the plantation. That's why he had 95 pounds of bacon. It was for everyone that was there, because his slaveholder had signed an agreement, an early precursor to what we know today as labor contracts, where she agreed to, take care of the folks that were on her land and pay them. And the federal government, through the Freedmen's Bureau, agreed not to consign anybody in her auspices to service in the Civil War. I found that later. That was all in the Freedmen's Bureau.
Wow, very cool.
So that she didn't align with the Confederacy, so she made that deal, and so that's what they operated on. But at that, again, how do I get to her? How do I get to Nancy Short? Well, I start looking for Short. Who is Short? Never heard this name, been researching in East Carroll Parish, or Carroll Parish at the time, for years. So I go to the 1860 census because, at this point, I'm hoping that this individual that they're associated with has died before the Civil War, because that will provide me with an estate inventory, a will, and other things that would name my family. And notice I just talked about Nancy. There she is, age 42. By the time the war happens, her husband, he was named Hugh Short, who was an attorney at law and a planter with $50,000 worth of real estate and $30,000 worth of personal estate. He had passed away. And I had to check because he wasn't on the 1870 census, but she was. So I'm like, please have died before the war, because I need that estate inventory. I need that will to document my ancestors. Now, here's the thing, and I want to really call this out. Notice the ancestors that I'm finding in this collection are not necessarily my direct ancestor. They are the brothers of my great-great-grandfather. So just like how we have to do research when you're doing DNA, and your matches may not, like, you're going to come from the same people, but they may come from a sibling of your ancestor. Also keep that same perspective when you're going through the Bureau. It may not be your direct ancestor that's going to give you the lead. It might be a brother. In my instance, almost always it's been a sibling that provided the lead. So Hugh, I'm like, please have died before 1865. And at that point, I searched wills and came up with his will that was dated in 1861, just a year after the 1860 census. And so again, as every time I read this, it's almost impossible for me to comprehend this will, because it's just one of the more interesting ones that I've ever come across. So he says, being attacked with a hemorrhage this morning, which may be from the lungs, I think it best to make my will at the same time, to say that there being no white person on the place, I do not wish suspicion to rest on any of my Negroes, as some persons might think I died by the hands of violence. Not so. My Negroes would defend me to the last. And the reason why he starts his will off like this is we are literally at the beginning of the Civil War. People in the area are burning their cotton so that the Union troops will not have access to it, because New Orleans has been overtaken. And so he is, for him to be sick, he doesn't want people to think that he was beaten by someone, in particular his enslaved people, and he wants to call that out. And the fact that this is memorialized in his will, and that we're reading it at this time, so many years later, is just, every time I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh. Because usually in wills with enslavers, they just have a certain format to them. You never hear stuff like this where they are actually in some ways thinking of the formerly enslaved in this way.
He cared.
Right. And I solidly believe, because when you get to the 1870 census with my family, between my third great grandparents and their sons, they had about $4,000 worth of personal estate. You don't get to that spot unless your slaveholder allows you to hire yourself out, and they all had skilled trades. And it was fully legal for them to keep the profits of them hiring themselves out in the state of Louisiana. So I honestly think that he did that. But the most important part of this will, after he talks about leaving his law library to his son and his wife, collaborating with his business partner, William S. Parham, he says, in the sale of my property to pay the debts, I wish my Negro man King and his wife Rachel. King and Rachel are the parents of William with the horse stealing incident, John, who got the 95 pounds of bacon. They're also my third great grandparents and the mother of my second great grandfather, who is King Atlas Jr.
Fantastic.
So just that one note that said Short's place, right?
Led you to all of this.
To go to a census, find him. Okay, he's not on 1870. Let me try and find the succession and the will within this, because we are in the state of Louisiana, and I'm always going to big up Louisiana and Mississippi. Successions are great because a lot of times the court would wait until it got to a sense of finality and all the pages are successive. So you'll see they died. Here are the administrators. We admit the will. We give, administration to, power to go and do an inventory. Here's the inventory. Here's the division of estate. Like, it's all in successive pages. So I just kept scrolling. Now, granted, when I got to that will, remember, it took me 20 years to get to that point. It took me 2 hours before I scrolled the pages because I was hysterical crying because I never thought I would find those names. I had settled on my folks had been brought from Africa on a spaceship and dropped in Lake Providence, Louisiana. I really had settled on that. But I found the proof after 20 years, again, because we're leading the Freedmen's Bureau. So you see two excerpts from the two different lists of enslaved people that Hugh Short was a slaveholder of. The first list are the folks that were at the house in town, which included a man named John Black, who was John Atlas. I know that he was he was enslaved and he worked in the house. That was oral history that was passed down to his descendants. Then there's a second list of enslaved, which includes my third great grandparents, King, age 55, his wife, Rachel, age 55, and their two youngest children, which is William from the horse stealing incident and Uncle Andrew. Then through the process of me going tracing the slaveholders, I found out that Henry that is listed right underneath them is Rachel's son. I had no idea she had had a child prior to her marrying my third great grandfather. He's there with his wife, Mary, who's age 22, and they have a son named William, of course, after his brother William, and an infant child. Then you skip down a couple lines, and there's my second great grandfather, King. And at that point, I said, who is Drusilla? I had never heard of Drusilla. I thought Grandma Alice was his first wife. I knew about the ones afterwards. I had no idea that he was even married before he had married my great great grandmother. But there it is, clear as day, on the inventory of enslaved people belonging to Hugh Short. Again, all of this, once I got the Bureau records that you can now search and find on Ancestry, I was able to get to the 1860 census, then the succession, right? And by the time I was done, I was able to get a timeline of slaveholders starting about 1840.
Nice. Good for you. Good job. Seriously, I mean, that took some serious amount of work, but it kind of gave you some clues right from the Freedmen Bureau records. And just to be clear, not all of this, just to be clear, not all of these records that you found came from the Freedmen Bureau records. Some of the wills and estate stuff.
Correct. And
elsewhere.
so it's pivoting, right? It's getting the clue and then going back to your traditional record sets in order for you to, find people. Again, I think I'm going to really actually start using that, the terminology that I talked about earlier, because I think people are more familiar with it with DNA, recognizing that the clue may not come through your direct ancestor. It might come through a sister or a brother of theirs or even a cousin.
And we talk about the fan club and cluster research a lot here. And I think, you can't emphasize that enough, especially for people who are just getting into genealogy, that, sometimes it's a sister's diary that has the tidbit of juicy information that you need. So
correct.
Fantastic.
And again, here's the thing. There are so many documents. I mean, it's just, we could play all day. I do personally, just because I'm curious.
Right.
This is a list of, it's a report of indigent refugees and freedmen, and it's from Avoyas Parish, Louisiana, and it's dated the January 1st to the 31st, 1867. And what I want to call out are the people who are in green.
Okay.
Those individuals are age 90 in 1867.
Holy cow.
This is not a rarity. This is across the board. Remember, our country was in upheaval at this point. So there are scores of folks. Most of the rations list that I see, the majority of the people are over age 50, which means that those individuals may not have even lived to the 1870 census. This might be the only time you actually see them documented. In fact, if you've ever heard of the Georgetown 272, I found them getting rations in Iberville Parish, Louisiana, in their 80s and their 90s within the Freedmen's Bureau collection.
So this record is from January 1867. Is that what that says?
That's correct.
So that means that these 90-year-olds were born prior to the 1800s.
Correct. They were born about 1777.
Holy cow. That's pretty good stuff right there.
And again, what other set of documents do we have to cover that really crucial 5-year time span with the end of the war, with the end of slavery, and the 1870 census? Beyond, right, local records, but even then you're at the mercy of, did the courthouse burn down at some point?
Exactly.
So, and because this is federal, thankfully, we have not, we're going to cross our fingers and pray that we never have a catastrophic fire at our archives. But this is yet and still a great example of this. Now, something else that, again, with the title, Bureau of Refugees, the refugees were poor whites. So this collection is not just entirely about the formerly enslaved or free people of color or Black people. Remember, there were white folks who came and got services from the Bureau. There are white folks that worked for the Bureau, teachers, agents in the field offices, people who just worked as clerks in the offices. There are also Black folks that had support roles for the orchestration, for the administration of the Bureau. So
and the plantation
it's
owners
not
too.
Hello, right? And some of those folks went into new roles.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you have an ancestor who was living in the North and you find someone with a similar name in the Freedmen's Bureau, do not assume your ancestor didn't come down from the North to come and work that land.
Good point.
They could have, and they might be on a labor contract. So this document we're looking at is very similar to the last one I just showed you, but this is in Orleans Parish in Louisiana, and it's destitute. Notice they scratched out freed and freed. So it's destitute whites, indigent and destitute white people in the parish of Orleans, applying for relief, March 10th, 1868 to April 10th, 1868. And again, all these people on this list are white. They're not Black. A lot of the lists are segregated. Just like a lot of the records during this time span, you're going to see records for whites and records for Blacks, but it literally will be in the exact same collection. And I want to call attention to a 29-year-old woman who's there in green, who has 3 children under the age of 14. And her cause of destitution is the fact that her husband died. And she has 3 sick children.
Now,
how do you take this record and go somewhere else?
That's amazing. I'm wondering too, as I look at, I'm always professing to go look at the people above and the people below, or pages to the left, pages to the right, and try and extract some of that data to see if there aren't any other family members by the same names or whatever. Do you feel like these records would have the same opportunity to do that kind of neighborly research?
110%.
Yeah, good. All right.
Yeah, 110%. That is, in fact, again, that kind of goes back to, the point of searching for siblings. Searching for siblings, family members, community members, all of that. I mean, and here's the thing. I went to the 1870 census 2 years later, and I find her by herself, working as a domestic servant in the household of a man named Samuel Ehrlich, who is a retired dry goods dealer who was born in Russia. And she herself, Johanna Madden, was born in Ireland.
I see that. That caught my eye. And I think her parents are foreign born as well.
Correct.
Yes. Wow. Good stuff.
Last one, the child with my favorite name right now. This is a list of pupils transferred from the Lincoln to the Frederick Douglass School on the 18th of April, 1866, with the amounts of tuition they paid. Freedmen's Bureau, again, they operated schools. One of the most well-known Freedmen's Bureau schools that is still in operation is Howard University in Washington, D.C. There's also a hospital attached to Howard that was a Freedmen's Bureau hospital. Cool. And on this list is number 22, a little girl named Valentine Grand Prix, who has paid her $1.50 to go to this school. And this list has 100+ children on it. And I have been hot on the trail trying to find all of them just because I want to know where they went and what happened to them. And so I decided to take this list from 1866, take it to the 1870 census, and you find 15-year-old, because we didn't have, ages on that last list. We find 15-year-old Valentine in the house with her who appears to be her grandmother, who was born in Cuba, listed as Valentine Goubert. I think it's Goubert. And her mother, Louise Grand Prix. She's got a sister named Louise, brother named Henry, sister named Irma or Elma, and other folks within the household.
Wow, good stuff. You are awesome. Well, clearly you've been working with this for a while and have a good grasp of these records. Anything else that we missed?
Now that I'm thinking about it, contraband camps and refugee camps, along with home colonies. So contraband camps are where the enslaved or formerly enslaved, depending on where they lived. Remember, the Emancipation Proclamation only applied to specific states. And then even then, were the local people actually abiding by the fact that the slaves were free? Usually that's not the case. But either way, the formerly enslaved, especially if they're slaveholders, absconded, left, or they saw the Union troops there, they would leave and begin these sort of camps because they would want to, gain services and help from the Union troops. And so they would set up in these locations, and it would become almost sort of like a little town. And so the contraband, in the name contraband camp, were the formerly enslaved because they were considered contraband from the enemy government, right? Then you also had refugee camps. Again, that term refers to poor whites or indigent whites who were in these locations where the Bureau operated. So they also had camps. Then when you start talking about home colonies, that's a whole separate concept. It's sort of the same. One well-known one is Destrehan Plantation in South Louisiana. It's a plantation you can actually go and visit now. And that was the site of the Louisiana slave revolt in 1811. The owner of the plantation at the time of the Civil War became a part of the Confederate Army, and he actually was a officer in it. And so the government came in and confiscated his land, and that land that was the home colony was Destrehan Plantation. It was a sugar plantation. What they used it as was sort of like it was a dispensation point. People could come in, they have lists of people who come in and lists of people who leave. It was a hospital. They issued rations, clothing. People actually worked the plantation, and in exchange for their labor, they were able to live there and be taken care of. And so when you have the home colonies, you have even more records because some of the lists are almost like censuses. People, again, they came in and they left. And these exist all across the country.
And these records are part of that Freedmen Bureau collection?
Yes, they are.
Beautiful. Awesome. Wow. Not only are we getting a genealogy lesson from you, we're getting a history lesson as well. So thank you for that.
No problem.
Well, gosh, this has been like wildly educational, for everybody. So let me ask you this. If people aren't familiar with you, where can they learn more about you?
Well, you can check me out here on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called Who Is Nicka Smith. I also have a website, whoisnickasmith.com. And I do lectures and teach all across the genealogy world. So you may see me at a conference or event, or maybe at your local society. And I also have a Patreon community where I do a lot of this teaching. In fact, this year, we've done 5 different webinars on the Freedmen's Bureau. One that's an overview, and then we have others offered on various states like West Virginia, Virginia, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Mississippi that are specific to those states. And we'll be expanding those in the future as well.
Well, thank you so much for this. Gosh, I need to go back and dig into these records again because it's been a little while since I looked at them.
Just browse. That's the best way to learn this collection. Like I can't. That's how I've learned. And the guide, you live and die by that guide for that state. Yeah. I just always say, I'm like, we didn't put our tax dollars to use for the National Archives staff to write those wonderful guides. And we're just like, I don't need it. Like we should, you know what I mean? That guide is there for a reason. It provides an incredible history of what happened specifically in that state and things to look for. I call them, like golden eggs, right? Like, or the golden ticket items in that respective state, where, like, where do they give a huge number of rations out? So then that's like, in addition to the normal things like, labor contracts and lists, when you're looking for lists, you're specifically looking for rations because that state issued a ton of rations, really sort of directing your research in that way. with reading the guides helped. And trust me, I understand, because it's 20 pages. Some guides are 100 in totality.
I know that on Ancestry that you can get directly to the Freedmen Bureau records by going to ancestry.com/Freedman. I think Freedmen's with an S.
Yeah, Freedmen's with an S.
Yeah. So if I'll put that on the screen as well. But yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
No problem. Yeah, and there's, as I'm finding things, like, and this is just a practice I just have. I'm just saving them to a folder, saving them to my shoebox, because I'm like, I have a greatest hits folder, just of stuff that I'm finding, because you don't know what's in here. Like, we don't know. Right. Like, that sounds crazy, because you can say there were this many people on the census and this many people between this age and that. We really do not know everything that's in here. We don't.
Yeah, and with this edition at Ancestry, hopefully more people will learn about the Freedmen Bureau records. I know a lot of people don't even know what they are. This has been great. Thank you so much for joining me today, and hopefully people will get a sense of where they can go next to find their African American research and their white ancestors as well.
Correct. Thanks for having me.
Now, remember, everyone has access to these records on Ancestry. Just make sure that you have that guest account at least, so that you can research these records. Now, they are available on Family Search as well, but it is my understanding that the index of these records is an every name index on Ancestry. Now, I'm always saying this. If you can't find what you're looking for on whatever your favorite platform is, make sure you're checking out the other platforms and do searches there as well, because the search engines and the indexing sometimes are different. And so it may deliver different results. All right, now, as a reminder, there is a handout for this episode. If you want the handout for this, make sure that you are joined at the information access level channel membership. Those channel members will find the handouts in the community tab, and you're supporting Genealogy TV along the way. If you are a patron at the patreon.com/Genealogy TV at the Happy Dance level, which is like $15 a month, I think, or higher, the handouts will be emailed to you each month as they come about, and you'll find those in the post as well. You can also find the handouts at genealogytv.org for just individual purchase. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can help me get to 100,000 subscribers. I'm dying to get there. And well, there are more videos on the screen that may help you with your genealogical journey. I hope you're getting a lot of value out of that. If so, hit the like button for me. All right? Well, until next time, keep on climbing your family tree.